we're now in Substance Painter, and we basically are going to import our mesh. We're going to click New over here. Just going to make, going to use 2K maps. I don't want to go to 4K. It's no point for this project. So now we want to, we've set up the options, OpenGL, 2K. I always use OpenGL for Substance, for Blender. It's basically it's the best way to have your textures generated. So I'm just going to go and get my geometry, and then make sure you've got the option create a texture set per UDIM tile turned on. We don't need to auto unwrap, as we have already auto unwrapped, and I don't think both of these options even work together. And then we're just going to press OK, and that will load the mesh in. So you can see this is the mesh that we've been working on. These are the texture sets, which I've told you basically Substance Painter will generate based on our unwrap. Yeah, so you can see it over there. And now we basically want to start adding quick textures to it. So you can see we've got a big hole in the wall, but it doesn't really matter because we can take this wall, put it on the top of there. So this is just creating a very small modular kit of making some basic textures. Texture stylized walls, let's call them. Right, so we know that 1001 is the door, or whatever, this 1002 is part of the wall, 1003 is the gate. Now it really all depends on how you want to set the UDIM tiles when you start exporting these over to Substance Painter. It's really up to you, but there has to be a sort of a logic of what you're doing in order to make things a lot easier. Right, so starting with number 1001, I've got this material here called Castle Main Gate off of some substance source. Just going to drop it in there, and this will basically add a castle. You can see it's added over here as well. So what we need to do is right click it and then say add black mask. If we go over here and we select this option, polygon fill, then we select mesh fill, and we click on the mesh on the door itself, and that's it. That's where the texture will show up only. Now part of this is also you need it over here, maybe on the bottom side. Well, it's not selecting it because the bottom side is on another part of the UV. It's fine, don't worry about that. Now we don't want it to show over here, so I'm just going to make sure it doesn't show on this side by pressing X on the keyboard and then selecting these walls. Right. You can also see that Substance Painter has automatically triangulated the geometry that we've imported, right? Which is not a problem because when you go into Blender, you can turn it back into pause if you need to. Right. Okay, so we've got our door set up. We can add some more details if you want to it, but again, this is not the purpose of what we're doing here. Now we want to go to 1002, which is the wall. And on the wall, we need to throw in some, I've got this stylized wall. I'm just going to add this in. Let's see if we like it. So this texture is now loading in. Right, so this is our texture. Right, okay. Now what we want to do is we want to start adding our displacement mapping. So I've just opened our shader editor. I'm going to take the height information to 0.02. And I'm going to increase the subdivision count to 32, right? This means that we've tessellated this mesh now, although it doesn't show you in the wireframe. If you go up here and you activate wireframe, it doesn't show you that. It still shows very basic geometry, but we basically we've subdivided the mesh to about 3 million polygons really at this point. Right, okay, so this is how our texture looks like, and I'm fine with it, we can probably, we can definitely go and play with the height a little bit. Now you can see this texture particularly doesn't have height parameters. So what we can do is we can right click on it, add a level option on it, change this to height, yeah, and then basically play with these options. So you can see if we play with these options, we can take some of that detail out even further, like so, but obviously you don't want to go too much on that because it will break the texture. You can tweak with these a lot to get the result that you want, so I would definitely recommend you going through these and really toying with these options. Okay, now we want to add the same texture, so I'm just going to copy it. So copy this layer and go to 1003 and drop it in there as well. And you can see now that we've got a matching sort of texture. Now I know this doesn't look amazing, and the idea here wasn't to look amazing because we're not really doing any type of, I mean, we're not even putting any effort into it. I've just gone to my door texture set as well to drop this in. And one problem that you can see here straight away is that the height information of the stylized wall is showing through the door. In order to fix that, we click the texture of the door, we change this to a height, and then we change this option here to replace, and now we've got that problem out of the way. We can still see the normal map though. So again, now we go to normal and we say the same thing, replace. That doesn't seem to work, which is quite interesting. Okay, so then why don't we just go over here and we take the normal out? But if we do that, then obviously this is what happens. Okay, so we do have a bit of a problem, but luckily there's always black masks that can resolve this. Actually, we can add a white mask, and then we press X on the keyboard, and with polygon fill and mesh select, we make sure that we deselect the door, right? Okay, so let's also go and deactivate the wireframe because it's really getting on my oh no, sorry, the wireframe is only active because I've got a black mask active. Okay, right, so you can notice over here where we've got the seams, there are a bit of problems with the elements, so you can see how the displacement map is breaking the geometry a little bit. Normally, what I like to do in these cases, so if we go to our texture 1003, which is the gate here, I like to copy this texture, paste it again. I'll take the levels out of it, right? I will leave the height on. Actually, I don't want to take the levels out. Just leave the levels in there. I'm gonna add a black mask on top of it, right? And then I want to basically paint that in. And why do I want to paint again over here? Because I'm gonna select its levels and I'm going to say I want this to, I want to tweak with these numbers a little bit so that it fixes whatever errors I'm seeing over here. So this is not an easy task by any stretch, because normally, generally this means to go to height information of none. So it's a bit tricky to do. You can see how, I'm pulling this apart. So let's just try something like that. And then again, you may want to paint that in. You can see how it's taking the height out. Well, at the minute it's not taking any height, so that means that we basically messed up the levels. So you've got to be very careful what you're doing over here when you play with these options. See, that's not going to work for us. This is not doing anything, because one other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that this is replacing. Sorry, yeah, that's why it doesn't work. So now, as you can see, whatever we do over here, it will affect the mesh underneath. So it's all about balancing this out a little bit, right? So you want to play with these settings. So maybe something like that. And now we go back to our black mask, and you see if you paint it out. So if you remove this, if you paint this out, it will revert back to its problem. But if we paint it in, we can sort of fix the seam a little bit, right? You can see that, right? So you still have the height information in there from your previous texture, but you are fixing whatever sort of deformations you get from the other one, right? So this is a known thing with height maps, and I'm sure some of you guys may have better options at how to deal with this, but this is my current option. And if you have enough noise in your texture, these are not necessarily noticeable. So you see, look here, see how bad that is. So basically, because these are now on two different UDIMs, you need to go and fix the other side as well as you did this side. So we need to copy this, and then go to the door, paste it in, and then go to the black mask and do this. Yeah, see? But now that's fixed it. We still have our height information on these other sides, but we have fixed that part over there. And we, you can always go to the levels here and increase the levels on everything else in there. So this is where the one thing that you can break with displacement maps is literally the edges, and these are things that you can work on if you want to. For example, over here we may want to change this to, say, 1 or 5, make it even smaller. See? For some reason, the smaller you go over here, the worse the performance starts to slow down, which I'm a bit unsure as to why. Right. Okay. So now you can see how we've generated this this sort of texture, which is, as I've said, it's not looking necessarily good or anything, but it's an option, and it's something that you can do to get fast geometry. Now what I want to do is I want to export this ugly looking wall over into Blender and set up its materials. So we don't have any sort of baking done at this point, and we don't really need to make any baking apart from ambient occlusion. So in order for us to get ambient occlusion, this is the trick that I'm showing you. You're going to go into File, and then you're going to export the mesh, right? And you've got this option with displacement tessellation. You select that option, and then you click Export. Once you did that, we'll just call this castle wall substance, doesn't really matter, and we'll save it. Right, now this is exporting 3.1 million triangles, which is fine. And then we can use this mesh to bake our ambient occlusion, because in our workflow with UDIMs, at the minute, if you export the mesh as it is right now from Substance Painter and you want to use it, Substance Painter will not retain the UV maps as you've laid them in your UDIMs in Blender. And if anybody knows an option on how to do this, please let me know, but so far I haven't found anything that gets this to work. So we're just going to go in our baker, right? Bake mesh maps. We don't need anything else. I mean, if you want something else, you can get the other ones as well. But we'll go into ambient occlusion, 2K map. That's what I want to make at the minute for our intended purposes. And then we'll select castle wall substance. We don't have multiple elements, so it's fine to just leave everything else as there is. And then we're just going to press bake all texture sets. And now you can see that it will use that high poly mesh that we've just exported out of Substance Painter to create our ambient occlusion for our maps. So I'm just going to skip basically over there to the end, just because it's probably going to take 1 or 2 minutes or something like that to finish this off. As you can see, it's already started. So yeah, I'll see you guys in just a second. So as you can see now, this is done. Basically, we have the ambient occlusion generated. And if we go press M on the keyboard to go back, you can sort of see the ambient occlusion over here. If we go into our texture sets and we have a look at the ambient occlusion, if we deactivate it, then you can see a bit of loss of shadow there from the ambient bake. Can't really tell that much over here on this texture. It's all dependent on the textures you're going to use, but you can clearly see it over here, right? This is the ambient occlusion that we've baked. So let's just try and think about what we've learned. So we've learned how to make in Blender, how to get UDIM set up in Blender, how to then add some basic procedural textures over in Substance Painter and create geometry around that. We are going to create geometry in Blender. But we've also learned how to do a bit of fixing on the edges of displacement maps. And I think that's the point where a lot of people run away from displacements, just because of how these edges work. Now, all I'm going to say is you need to know when and how to use displacement maps and how they benefit you. They generally benefit on flat planes and where the edges of those planes cannot be seen. That it's very important to work out how to deal with that, as I said. Right, so we want to now go over here and do export our textures, and I'm going to let them export to whatever Substance wants to put them in, and we're going to export them at 2K. Yeah, obviously I would normally use 4K, but this for this particular example I'm going to use 2K because it's going to be a lot faster. And the output templates, this is basically the new substance exporter, which is a lot better, texture exporter, but in essence it functions just the same that it used to. I've got my own Blender and Marmoset setup over here. Depending on what maps you have, it will export, you know, an ambient occlusion and so on. I haven't named these for UDIM purposes, but it should be fine this way. And I'm just going to press export on the on here. If you want to copy my setup for maps, you can do so from that page. Pause the video and get it. And now all the textures have been exported, and we can go back into Blender. Right, and in Blender we now want to set up the nodes. So we're just going to go into shader editor, and we've got a material set up for this already. I'm just going to delete these and basically want to start adding the textures that we've made. So Shift A on the keyboard, search for a texture, image texture, drop it in, click open over here, get your computer to, well, no, it didn't freeze, sorry. Right, okay, so I'm just going to go into my Substance Painter export folder, and I've got everything over here. So what happens is Blender will know that the textures are coming into, for free UDIMs. It reads 1001 to 1002 to 1003. So when we press open image, and we connect this over into our base color, you can see it's now loaded the texture correctly, right? So you can see that's not a problem, right? I'm just going to switch over to the shading into EV render mode, and Shift A to add a light source, and I'm going to add sun. Okay, and I'm just going to change its angle a little bit and its power. Yeah, that should be fine. And I'm going to deactivate shadows just because it makes things look a bit weird at the minute. Right, let's go back to our wall. And now we want to add the rest of the nodes, so the rest of the textures. So I'm just going to control paste, yeah, paste again. The reason why I'm opening them this way is because I found when dealing with UDIMs, it's better to not just drop in the textures, but to actually open them this way. I don't know why this is the case, but it definitely is. So metallic over here, and we want roughness over here. So now we just need to link over these points basically. So I'm just going to mix the metallic. I'm going to add a mix RGB and an invert. So I want to open the metallic, and then over here I want to open the roughness. Always 1001, right? I'm just going to drop in my metallic, I'm going to drop in my roughness, I'm going to drop in my metallic again, and then I'm going to put this into the roughness node. And then again, you can play with the settings based on whatever you want. I'm then going to open over here the height, and I'm going to open over here the normal. Sometimes when you add the height and the normal in here, it causes some glitches. So that's why I'm just going to add the normal to begin with. So I'm just going to add a bump. I'm going to drop the bump over here, and now I'm going to add a normal map as well. I'm going to plug this in over into the normal. I'm going to plug the normal into the normal, and the normal into the normal. As you can see, there's a lot of normals being plugged in. And now we should have our normal in, which is fine. We may, depending on the settings, because we're an OpenGL, this should already be fine. So I'm just going to drop in the height over here. One thing that I have not done is to add an RGB to black and white and drop it over into the height. And then if we need to, we're going to invert depending on the settings that you want. But because we're using OpenGL, we don't need to invert this. We can just keep it as as if it was DirectX, we would have needed to invert this. And you can play with the strength if you want to. It's all about whatever sort of detail you want to get. Right. Okay. So now we've got this set up. We need to now displace the mesh. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go over here into our modifiers, we want to first and foremost add a subdivision surface modifier and make sure you put it over to simple. And then take the viewport, render to 2, add another subdivision surface, and this one leave it to Catmull Clark, and then take this over to let's say 2 iterations. I think that should be fine. Okay, well, actually, you know what, let's just take it over to 3 iterations. Just got to give it a bit until it loads. Right, we're at 1 million triangles at the minute, right? And now we want to add the displacement modifier. So over here, add the displace, and this is obviously going to explode the mesh. Any second now. Okay, so we've got this done. Obviously it looks terrible. We then need to go over into textures and create a new texture. Everything moves a lot slower when you have a lot of polygons to work with. So now we've got the texture over, we're just going to go over here. We don't necessarily need to open, we can just click this button over here and select the castle height. Once that loads in, we need to then switch over this texture to look for the UV coordinates. So you see we've got our mesh over, and we're going to go back to our modifier. This is already set up to the texture that we've just created. I mean, if we create a new one, you can change to multiple textures if you want to. And then over here, we're just going to select UV, and this is going to now look into our UV layout and start to work out the displacement from that. As from my previous tutorial, it functions in the same way. And the strength, we're going to set up to 0.0, well, I think 0.02 may be too small. So I think we're going to go to 0.2. Now, generally, say 0.02 is way too small. We get no result, but 0.2, on the other hand, should give us, close to the results that we had in Substance Painter. Yeah, and that's it, basically. Some of the things that you may notice is we got a bit of errors over here on this side, and obviously on this side as well. The reason why these errors are happening is because we still have sort of meshes, parts of the mesh exploding. So how do you generally fix this? Well, you fix it exactly like I told you. You need to paint in those areas on the edges to basically fix it, right? Now that's that will take a bit of time to do, but that's how you that's how you get it fixed. You can also play with the mid-level a little bit and try and get some better results. I've made a mistake of sliding it, which then means that it's going to freeze my application just because we got too many polygons into play. So playing with the mid-level basically will reduce that, but actually I thought it was the other way around. If you make it smaller, it should make it better, not if you make it I've just switched it now to 0.2 and see what sort of effect that has. No, obviously it means that the mid-level, if you do the mid-level higher, it will make the mesh look worse. So we're just going to take the mid-level over to 1. So you do have to tweak with these settings, but in order to really make it work a lot better, you do need to fix it over at the source, which is when you're in Substance Painter basically, and paint out the corners and make it well, more seamless basically. Right, okay, so now you can see that we've added, I think now we've got a better result. So if we would have used the 4K map, would have definitely been a lot better for this, but we can probably 0.15 because we want to bring up a bit more height. So let's see, still not looking amazing because it's still sort of coming out too much. 0.1, let's try that. So again, this is definitely a game where you need to like really tweak these settings. but because we haven't fixed it over in Substance Painter completely, this is what happens. You know, if you can see over here where we did do some work on it, it does look better than in other places. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to add a decimate modifier. So where is it now? I can never find a decimate. Right there it is. So once we add a decimate modifier, we can, you know, get our geometry to a lower spec than what it was. Oh, I've just realized we haven't added the ambient occlusion map to this, and we have generated one. Basically, you need to do a node setup for the ambient occlusion, but again, I've showed you how to get the texture out. You can set it up in here as well. So now we've got a displacement modifier. We may also, by the way, we may also have problems with all of this because we have not used enough polygons for the job. So we may want to go from 1 million polygons to something like 3. Now, if you remember, in Substance Painter, we did export a mesh out that had 3 million polygons rather than just 1. So I would definitely go and do that. You know, definitely go in and increase. So I've just taken out these two modifiers. I've deactivated them in the view, you know, in our options, and then I am going to increase our viewport resolution. So we were at 1 million faces, and I want to go to 3 million. So let's just see what sort of we get over here once this calculates. So as you can see here, 1 million. Come on, work it out. Need to get a better computer, it seems. It's just it's not going fast enough. Blender is taking way too many resources, way too much time to finish off the process. So we're now at 4.2 million. Okay, and now we basically activate the displace option again, which, because we have a lot more polygons to work with, it should, in theory, make it look a lot better. So we could probably push that strength a bit higher. And the decimate option, we're obviously, you know, going to go from a ratio to 0.05 from a ratio of 1. And so we're going to get rid of most of these polygons. We're probably going to end up having a mesh with, you know, 2 million or something like that. So as you can see, we still get some of these errors over here. Yeah. We might want to change our mid-level again to, let's put it back to 0.5 and see what that means for us. But you can definitely see that the resolution of our mesh, the quality of our displacement has definitely increased. And I've used a texture that's basically all full of bumps on purpose, just to get as much of this crunchy texture as possible. And I think this should be now, you know, completely loading. I'm just going to skip over to once it's finished. So we've applied, we basically did the texture. Well, we've got our subdivisions, we've got our decimate in place. We're just gonna move this over to 0.05. As I've said, you know, and I'm reiterating this, if you want to fix these artifacts on the sides, the only way to do this is to basically go into Substance Painter and edit the map around the edges so you don't really have any height information that would then get in the way and split the UV like it's happening right now. And that's it. Unfortunately, that is the sort of trade-off for using displacement maps for, you know, shapes like this, wherever you have an edge. That's why it's always best to be used on planes. So, for example, making a sand dune, making grounds, making, you know, a ground floor, making walls that you cannot reach the outer sides of it. Those are the perfect applications for using for creating displacement geometry. And as I've said, if you guys know of any other way to sort of fix displacement maps on the edges, please let me know. But that is the only way that I know of, at least so far. I'm sure in the near future they're actually going to find better and better ways to fix this. And also, I hope that the guys at Substance Painter will also have their, you know, their meshes be able to be exported with the original UV maps rather than having all of them overlap. Because if I would have exported that mesh from Substance Painter with the default geometry and everything that we did, which by the way would actually be a more suitable mesh for us to be used. We wouldn't have this problem at the corners at all. The problem with that, all the UVs that we created for the UDIMs, all the UDIMs would have been overlapping each other when we were imported back into Blender. So then, if you have different surfaces from the same mesh that are now have their own UV layouts, you can't really separate them, at least not at that high poly count level. So this is what makes it very difficult, because you could still replicate your UV layout, your UDIMs, if you were able to select the meshes. But then that would defeat the whole purpose of the UDIMs, and it would just be better off making a UV map for each mesh if you're going to separate them. But you have to, if you want to have one singular mesh with UDIMs, then it's not really a possibility at the minute to use Substance Painter for this. So my computer is still sort of processing the decimation level now. But basically, once that finishes, it will go to, as I said, something like 200,000-300,000 polys, maybe around there. It really depends. And then after that, you can just convert this into a 3D model, and that's it. Your model is basically finished, and then you can work with realigning it and so on. We have definitely did quite a bit of speed through this, so not fixing these corners or anything like that. I'm actually going to show you the model that we've exported from Substance Painter, and just basically show you what I mean by importing it, and how the UDIMs would have shown up straight as being exported from Substance Painter. And I think that's going to be very interesting for you guys to see. So now we've got both the models in the scene. So that's the one this is the one that we've taken off from Substance Painter. And you can clearly see the errors here on the edges that we haven't fixed. But over here, where we had the other error, I'm just going to have to make this a bit bigger, this model. Where we had the other error, where we fixed the error, you can see that the shape is actually showing okay, which is quite different from the other side of the wall, where the shape isn't looking as good. What I mean by this is basically it's got these gaps in between, and you can see them over here, right? And this is the other version, the one where we basically, let me just select it, where we've made our textures, we decimated it, so now it's at 424,000 faces. So before you actually go into, you do your UDIMs and everything else. And actually that's what I wanted to show you. So on this other model over here, you can see, if we go into the UV editor, if we press tab on the keyboard to go into edit mode, which should probably take a bit to load because you got that many polygons, but once it does, you'll basically see all of these polygons now show up in this UDIM. So there you have it, right? So they're actually in the same setup as we laid them to begin with, but unfortunately they're all laying on top of another, so we can't really pull them out and put them into their respective UDIM tiles. So if we put the textures back in now, they're just going to overlap too much. So that's why currently we don't have the option to export the mesh from Substance Painter and actually be able to use it as we want to use it in in Blender. And with this model over here, we've got all these modifiers. Rather than applying everything, I would just literally go to Object, and then you've got an option over here where it says Convert to, and just select this option, and that's it. It will make it into a full mesh, and the UVs will be laid properly over here and everything else. So I hope you guys found this video useful, and it gives you some insight and information as to how to use the UDIMs in Blender, how to use them in Substance Painter, and how to basically get some displacement done in Substance Painter and then brought back into Blender. Be sure to actually fix your height maps before you actually do this, so you get nice and clean results. And I hope you guys found this video useful, and if you do, please subscribe, please like the video, leave a comment, leave your suggestions in. I would really be very happy to find out what you guys think, and I'll see you in my next video. Thank you, and